Is everyone ready? Good evening and welcome to the March 13th, 2019 Planning, Zoning, and Adjustment Board meeting. Would everybody please join me in the reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. I actually do just want to make a little observation. This is our first meeting of 2019, and for those of us who were on this board in 2018, it was a very unusual year. We, according to my records and our wonderful website, we only met twice. But I was thinking I didn't want anyone to think that that's because what we do here is inconsequential. Not that any of us believes that. But in case anybody else does who might be watching, the work we do here is really important. And I was thinking that our item tonight on the agenda is probably the quintessential epitome of the potential importance, in fact, possibly even life-saving importance of the work that we do, being asked to make decisions, land use decisions, and make recommendations rather, not decisions. So I just wanted to say that it's really good to be here again, and I believe the work we do is really important, and it's an honor to be here tonight. So that is all at this time. If anyone would like to make a motion for approval of the minutes.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes from the September 12th, 2018 meeting.
I'd like to second that.
Wait, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any disapprove? Okay, I think we've approved the minutes. Thank you very much. Mr. Basehart, is there anything, any reordering of the agenda, or?
If we reordered it, it'd be the same.
There's no new items or anything crazy? Okay.
No.
So I think we have to ask about, because this is quasi-judicial, we have to ask if
Actually, this is legislative.
it's okay.
Yes.
Why does it say that?
We made a mistake.
Okay.
Well, it says no. It says quasi-judicial, and then it says no.
Actually,
But,
no,
yeah,
it
Let's say
doesn't.
yes, I think.
This one has yes by it.
Mine says no.
Page 11 of 21.
Yeah, no, it says yes, believe me.
Okay.
And it's a separate page. Yeah, right here.
One says no, one says yes.
I have a no and a yes, but the no's on
The
the
nose on
September
the other one. yeah.
2018.
So anytime you're talking about
And the yes is fine.
ordinances or part of the code, that's going to be legislative. But
Okay.
if you're applying the code to someone's specific property or
Property.
situation,
Right,
then it becomes a quasi-judicial.
okay, very good.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Why we're doing it.
Well, thank you for that clarification. So then we don't have to swear in any speakers or anything like that. Okay. So, Mr. Basehart,
Okay.
if you are up.
Before you this evening is ordinance number 2019-3, which we refer to as the nightclub ordinance. And the genesis of this ordinance is Village Council's efforts and desire, if not to prevent, but to deter some of the negative impacts that are often experienced as a result of activities that go on at businesses that are generally termed as nightclubs. So, you know, this all started off with, as I'm sure you're aware, in somebody say something? Oh, okay. Wellington isn't alone in having a problem with traffic accidents and fatalities that are the result of people intoxicated coming from night places, night businesses, nightclubs. And we're not alone in the prevalence or the common experience of underage drinking, some of which also result in serious accidents and fatalities. seems like every year there's at least one here, and several more accidents as well. And it occurs around the county. Well, the village council, you may recall, a couple of years ago, started up a program they called Wild Stallion, which is it's an increased activity on the part of the sheriff's department to visit these establishments, sometimes undercover, sometimes not, but to identify underage drinkers, to identify individuals that maybe have had too much to drink and shouldn't be driving, and council would like to expand that program and do whatever we can. Sheriff's office approached us a while back and suggested that we adopt an ordinance that specifically regulated nightclubs. The county had adopted one. They gave us a copy of the county's ordinance and suggested that we consider either adopting it or something similar to it to help in the cause of protecting the public. And so I went to council with that. Council said yes, they would like to pursue an ordinance and directed me to draft it. And that brings us to where we are tonight. There are a lot of activities that are sometimes associated with nightclub activities. It's, again, the underage drinking, patrons leaving the businesses intoxicated, parking lot crashes and damage, vandalism, and there's a number of other things associated with them. So I'm sure you've noticed in reading the ordinance that the primary emphasis in the ordinance is requiring appropriate security. So basically, I wrote the ordinance. It's been to the Public Safety Committee, which has unanimously recommended approval. It's been to the Equestrian Committee because there are portions of this ordinance that affect the equestrian areas. They unanimously recommended approval, and we're here tonight for public hearing with you to consider the ordinance. Another thing I'd like to say is that after I wrote the ordinance, we created a list of all the businesses in Wellington. We wanted to notify people that might be affected by the ordinance. So I had a printout down of all the businesses in Wellington that have alcohol licenses, and there are 67 of them, I think. And then we looked at the list and we pared it down to all those establishments that could potentially qualify to be a nightclub. And so we came down with the list narrowed down to about 16, and at least half of those probably aren't, but I sent a letter to each the owners of each of those 16 businesses, advising them of the ordinance, giving them a copy, and explaining what the ordinance was all about and how it worked. I asked them to call me if they had any concerns or comments or recommendations, and, or just questions. And I got 2 calls. And one wouldn't identify themselves. They just said they wanted to know, they wanted clarification on the ordinance, and they didn't care to leave their business name or address with me. So, and the other one was the owner of Bonefish Max. I did talk to her, and so the community. The business community that will be affected by this has been, I think, well notified and given, I think, good explanation of what it's all about. And I don't see anybody here in the audience tonight that probably wants to talk about it. Maybe there is, but anyway, that's it. And getting into the ordinance, there's basically 3 elements to the ordinance. You know, one is we had to amend definitions. The definition section of our code has definition of a cocktail lounge. It has a definition of a restaurant. There is no definition of a nightclub. And so to clarify what each of those was and you know, provide a clear understanding of how each one functions, we modified the definitions of cocktail lounge and restaurant, and then added the new definition of nightclub. Then we had to set up the requirements. So the section of our code that provides supplemental requirements for uses is what we call section 6.4.4. It's the supplemental standards of the code. And so I added a section for nightclubs and provided the criteria. And we basically, after having defined them, we said, you know, what makes you a nightclub? And I kind of used the you might be a redneck if approach to it, and
Understood.
you know basically said if you charge admission, if there's a cover charge, or you're required to join a club to get in, then automatically you are a nightclub. And if you serve alcohol.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Bob, of the 67 you said in Wellington that serve alcohol, are those inclusive of hard liquor, or is it some or is it, wine and beer?
It's all licensed, all businesses that have a license to sell alcoholic beverage might be only beer and wine. And it would include C-stores and
Oh, okay.
yeah.
The 16 that you've isolated as could be, those are serving have licenses to serve what I call hard liquor or license.
Yes,
I forget
they
the
do.
number of it.
They do.
Which is the group? Okay, so those are inclusive of, from the 16, you have a potential of finding from them the ones that could be nightclubs.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So the provisions that we added, which is number 76A in the supplemental standards, basically set up the criteria. And, you know, there are 2 conditions that automatically make you a nightclub. And then there's a list of 6 other issues. And if you trip 4 of those, then you are a nightclub. And I want to point out also that, and it's in the ordinance, that if a business that functions in a nightclub, part of the day may also not function as a nightclub part of the day.
Right.
And, you know, so the security, you know, the other standards or the other operational requirements wouldn't apply during the times of day that they weren't functioning as a nightclub. The primary provision in the ordinance is the requirement to have security. And what we've done is we're requiring that when you're functioning as a nightclub, then you have to have security, and it's up to 150 people, or 150 people or more capacity. You know, you have to have, or a fraction thereof, you have to have 1 security person. So if you have 152 seating capacity, you know, then you'd need 2. If you're 450 or more, then, you know, you need 3. And so it's pretty simple formula, and we allow that the security personnel can be off-duty law enforcement people, sheriff's deputies, police department people, or alternatively, you could have, there is a state licensing provision for certified security guards and security personnel, and we've cited that as you can use those type of people as well. We've put in some provisions for minimum patronage age. As you know, the legal drinking age in Florida is 21. In a cocktail lounge or in a restaurant, they serve alcohol, and people under that age can go there, but they can't be served. What we've done is put a provision in this ordinance that if you're under 21 or if you're under legal drinking age, you cannot go in one of these places, accompanied or not, while they're functioning as a nightclub. We have provided some exemptions. We've exempted military personnel, and we've also exempted employees that might work there that that have a job there. Sometimes high school kids and college kids, people under 21 are hired as dishwashers or busboys or things like that.
Right.
So we've provided an exemption for that as well. And then, we just referenced the enforcement provisions that we use in all of our code requirements. And we've also put a provision in there. One is in the equestrian area. If you are a special use permit equestrian venue, that they commonly, as a part of those activities, they have tents where they serve meals and they serve drinks, and we've exempted that from the requirements if they have a special use permit for the event and a limitation that they can only function that way while there's actual equestrian activity going on the property.
Right.
And we don't want an equestrian venue to open up a nightclub and operate it 7 days a week on and off season. They don't have to meet the requirements of this code, but only during the time events are going on. We also have put a provision in that all businesses that I'll get to that in a second. We had to amend the use matrices. Now we've got 3 use matrices in the code: standard zoning, planned development districts, and the EOZD. Each of those have their own use matrix. So we had to add the use and the requirement that we've made it a requirement that new nightclub facilities coming in would need to be approved by the village council. But we've put an exemption in that any business operating in that capacity at the time this ordinance is adopted doesn't have to get council approval.
So they're grandfathered.
They're grandfathered in, but they still have to meet the operational requirements of the new ordinance. And like I said, we've made them conditional uses so that they need to be approved by the village council. Right. And other than that, there's nothing to the ordinance. Any questions?
Okay, so thank you for that explanation.
Sure.
Questions? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Bob, on special use, is there a special use permit required when there's a special event that occurs at a single site and it may have a use of alcohol for the site with no food provided? And so how is that handled? In other words, if someone were going to have a party or a wedding or something like that and was going to serve alcohol, or there was going to serve alcohol, and they have can they get a use permit to serve the alcohol?
No, because they wouldn't function under the criteria in the code as a nightclub. We're not going to make people get a permit, a special permit to have a birthday party or
that's
something.
That's what I was alluding to.
This is for businesses.
Strictly if they're operational and continually operating.
Right.
All right. Not on a single event occasion, or we're going to put that requirement on it.
Right.
Okay.
I'll take an outdoor event like if Coral Sky or whatever it's called now fell within the parameters of the boundaries of Wellington, it would certainly have a dance floor areas where patrons might dance, view live entertainment. That would be one. It would be open to the public with a ticket or an admission, that would be 2. Alcohol would be sold and consumed, that'd be 3. And the establishment features platform and musical staging area, that'd be 4. It would hit those criteria. Would you consider an outdoor concert venue like that a nightclub?
Yes. On
mean
the
like-
nights they had events. Now, what would happen if something like that wanted to be built in Wellington? They would, the amphitheater itself would need to get council approval, and they would simply add a request to also be classified as a nightclub during, events as a part of that conditional use that application, and it could be all approved at that time.
Approved or not, as
Right.
council dictates. Thank you.
Question.
Please.
One's more on the term of a nightclub. So technically, in his description, if something operated that way every Saturday and Sunday during the middle of the day, but had a stage and had all these other things, you're classifying that as a nightclub.
Yes.
Should that be a different term than a nightclub? Is there I mean,
Well, I think we've broadly enough defined what a nightclub is.
so there's no restrictions on hours. It's not a nightclub.
Well,
is
one
not
of the
defined after a
criteria-
certain hour of the day. I mean, there's some. It's a nightclub can be termed during the day a nightclub.
Right.
Okay. From a security perspective, the paragraph in here states that if you don't have, you can come in and ask for a reduction in security personnel if you haven't had 4 incidents in the year.
Right.
So if you have under 150, up to 150, it requires 1 security person.
Yes.
Is there any any minimums that can somebody come in and ask for that to be waived and you have 0?
They could request
Do we
it.
always have to have at least 1?
No, they could,
Can't
I
have
mean, somebody that had a seating capacity of 125 people and met all the criteria and was a nightclub, they would have to have 1 security person. If they never had any problems that required law enforcement to be called, and of course there's a record of all that, then they felt like because of the way they operated and how well they controlled things, that security personnel wasn't necessary, they could make a request that they not have to have one. And what the code says is that, the decision on that would be made by me. And of course, any decision I make that somebody doesn't agree with can be appealed to you. And it requires me to get a recommendation from the sheriff's department as well.
On that issue, I have a question. Because the ordinance allows the business to either hire private security or off-duty police officers, what about situations where hypothetically an incident occurs and had there been an off-duty law enforcement officer, he or she likely would have considered that something that law enforcement should have responded to. But if you have a private security who has a relationship with a business, perhaps they're not calling police and trying to handle things, keep them under wraps. How do you address that? How do you make sure that things that really should call for law enforcement response are requiring law enforcement to respond? Or, that law enforcement is being required.
Well, I
to
mean,
respond.
that's something that we really can't control. I mean, it could also be an off-duty police officer decides that when something happens, he's going to handle it himself and doesn't call the sheriff's department. That's a decision. Hopefully, hopefully off-duty police officers, off-duty sheriff's deputies, or certified licensed security personnel, hopefully that's in their training to know when they need help.
Well, then I guess a better question would be, do we have the definition of what requires a law enforcement response as it pertains to this ordinance anywhere?
No.
Does anyone else have any other comments or questions? I just want to clarify one thing, just make sure I understand. So the existing of the 16 identified potential nightclubs, of those that turn out actually do qualify according to this definition if it's adopted. They are grandfathered in.
Right.
So, and,
Well,
right?
first of all, we're not, I didn't go down and spend an evening at each one of them to determine whether or not they met all the criteria. It's just from what I know about them, there are 16 that we identified that potentially would be, and my guess is probably half of those, or at least 5 or 6 of them, would not be a nightclub. But to answer, I think what your question was going to be is those businesses that are currently in operation that qualify under this are exempted from having to go to the village council to be approved to operate as a nightclub. They're effectively grandfathered in.
So now that,
Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to continue. So now that they're going to be classified, let's say when they do become classified, is there going to be any sort of like financial requirement on their part to the village just for this new classification? And also for new businesses that are applying for this classification? I don't know why this just occurred to me. I'm just curious. I don't know if you've thought that far, but I'm just wondering. I don't know. That came up to my mind.
There is no annual licensing fee or any other charge associated with this ordinance.
Okay.
So none of the existing buildings will have to, pay any kind of fees or annual fees or.
Licensing, right.
The new ones will have to go through the zoning approval process like
Sure.
anybody else that needs a conditional use, and there's a cost associated
Sure.
with that.
Right.
But it's a one-time cost.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have another question?
Yes, I have
Dr.
a question.
Gregory?
I'd like to further talk about the idea of the having some kind of law enforcement on the premises, so which it indicates, and I take what Ms. Martinez said is really the point. Without police power, a company that's just providing security doesn't have any authority to prevent or see to the fact that an individual who might be intoxicated would not leave the building and get in a car and drive away. And if that's what the goal is, and I think that's what I read in this, is to try and put some semblance, because we have a history of having that problem in the community for many, many years. And I wonder that if our language shouldn't read or say that the police power should be authoritative, either police or sheriff's deputies that would be there, because they're the only ones that could stop somebody physically, as I understand it to be correct. And because we have, where I live in Olivia, we have security, but they absolutely know that when it comes to trying to stop some, you can't do any. You don't have that authority. And what I understand it to be anyway. Has thought been given to where we would go the next step, if not this one, as to allowing these things? Because I'd hate to see us create an ordinance, which I think is a great ordinance, and it does put some names on these these places, and put some organization to them. But yet, I wonder whether or not if we're not going to put any kind of any meat on the bones here to prevent possible consequences, and maybe maybe you're saying you provide. I know all the outsides. I mean, I'm thinking about it all the way to hire, for somebody to have to hire a police authority and come in there and nothing happens and everything is fine, and maybe for the 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000. But is there some way that we can address that issue?
Well, I'll partially answer it and then turn it over to Laurie. But yeah, we did think about that. We didn't. First of all, I think licensed security personnel. I probably don't have arrest powers, but we felt like the primary thing, or the basic thing that a security personnel at these establishments is intended to do is to keep order, to make sure there isn't underage drinking. I think they can card people, you know, and if a disturbance arose or someone was trying to leave the property intoxicated and they felt like that was not a good thing, they would call the sheriff's department, and within a couple of minutes, there'd be a sheriff's deputy there.
I mean, as a practical matter, I don't think they're gonna be leaving their assigned off-duty, position to arrest someone and cart them off. They would have to call
Yeah.
PBSO. They're being contracted to actually be the security for the business, and that doesn't really include their you know, daytime responsibilities of arrest and booking someone into you know, holding facility. So I think under either circumstances, whether it's PBSO or whether it's a contracted security officer, the response is going to be to call for backup from PBSO to assist with an unruly or, you know, potentially intoxicated citizen.
I would hope that that's what that would be the objective, really. I agree.
Well, this stipulates a Class D license, which includes physical security, access control, terrorism awareness, and emergency procedures. So it's everything up to and including concealed weapons. I think that's enough to detain somebody or stop somebody. It might be different than a gate security at a community like an Olympia, Versailles, some of these others, but so Class D seems to be fairly heavy duty.
Thank you for that research. All really good questions and really good points. This is obviously very important. So we want to get this right.
Remember, this is a public hearing as well.
Yes, so we do have to open up, we do need, unless anyone else would like to make
I just have
any
one
other
more
comments?
question.
Yep.
Yeah.
The security cannot be employed by the actual club itself. It has to be a third party.
No, I don't think so.
Security
I think
officers employed or
Generally,
contract?
when
It has
people
to be
hire
employed.
PBSO deputies, they hire them directly.
No, but I mean,
No, I
can
think
they
you're
have
talking
their own employees? And they
Can your
say,
employee be
It
a
does provide that they
classified?
could be an employee of the business. But realistically speaking, none of these businesses employ security officers.
but is there anything that prevents them from saying, yeah, to
It's a
their
requirement. Yeah.
busboy, hey, you're now a security officer?
Well, they have to have a Class D license, so
Okay.
no, if the busboy has that license, they could
Okay.
draft him into service
be
in
the
that
busboy.
capacity, but he'd
You wanna
probably
be
want a
paid more.
raise.
Right.
A big raise.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it.
Any other questions or comments before we open up to the public? I need a motion to
Motion to
up.
open a public hearing.
Do I have a
Second.
second? All in favor to open a public hearing?
Aye.
Okay. Do we have any cards? No, nothing.
Motion to close public hearing.
We have a second to
Second.
close? All in favor to close public hearing?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Would someone like to make a motion?
Did you read the whole process on this? Read the whole ordinance as it's approved?
Usually at PZAB, we don't do that.
Oh,
We
I-
do that at the council
Yeah.
level. Yeah.
That's why I was asking that. Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 2019-03.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None? Motion passes.
Thank you.
You are very welcome. Thank you.
Well written, well thought out. Thank you for
Yeah,
the
very,
authoring the ordinance.
Thank you.
and I have to say, the timing is perfect with the work that is ongoing with, rewriting and paring down the code, so this was very good. Do we have any other comments? Do we have to open up for comments from the public?
You have to come to the microphone.
Yeah, if you'd like to,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to speak, you need to come
It's
to,
okay, it doesn't bite.
It doesn't bite? Okay. Mr. Basehart, do you want to let us know what might be coming up in the future as far as maybe next month?
Well, we're trying to finish the last two sections of the code rewrite. Section 6 is, Article 6 is the hardest one to do. It's got all the, the pure development standards in it, and, and so we're working on it.
Okay.
We're getting very close to finishing it up. And then the last part will be Article 3, which is definitions. And you always do those last, because we're adding things as we write the other sections. So those will be coming within the next couple of months. We have an application in, which I think you all know about, which was submitted on the Players Club property.
I don't read the paper. What's that about?
Pardon?
I don't read the paper. What's that about?
Okay.
Just couldn't help himself.
The owner of the property that Players Club is on has filed an applications, and it'll be multiple applications, to change the property from commercial recreation to, was it residential E, I think, which is, it'll be the comp plan designation, and they want to do a condominium project. It's relatively low density. The property's 5 acres, and they originally were proposing 64 units, but they also were proposing substantial amendment to the code to grant substantial additional height. And they've had second thoughts about that, and they're coming, they've submitted some revisions. They're still working on some, but they're reducing the number of units and knocking a story off of their building. And, so whether or not an adjustment to the height limits in the code is going to be necessary or not, I'm not sure yet. But if they do, it'll be a minor increase. Actually, it'll replace the Players Club, so that building will be gone. The plans that they have submitted propose a level of parking below the building, which eliminates all surface parking on the property, which would be a nice feature of the site. It'll be very green looking driving by, and it'll protect the residents' vehicles. It's an upscale project. The average size of the units are going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,800 square feet each, which is pretty large for a condominium unit. And so that one will be moving forward, and you could see it probably not April, but possibly April, and almost for sure in May. Then there's been an application filed on what we have historically referred to as the FINA property, which is, it's 65 acres on the west side of State Road 7, just north of the hospital. In previous times, it was up until just recently, it was a mining operation on the property. They left the vegetation near the road, so driving by you don't notice what has happened on the backlands. But there's been a mixed-use project submitted, and depending on how fast they can clean up their applications and correct all the issues that the staff has, they'll be coming here too. That'll definitely not be here in April, but probably in May. In that one, it's a mixed-use project. The plans at this point have, I think, somewhere around a couple hundred conventional apartment units, 150 senior-only apartments, and an assisted living facility, a seniors club thing that, serves the area, and also has, I think, about 60,000 square feet of retail space and 30 or 40,000 square feet of medical offices. So that it's a mixed-use project, and they're working on the wrinkles, but that'll be coming forward soon.
Interesting, okay. Well, we've got good things to look forward to. Well, I don't know, do you guys want to hang out more, or does anybody want to make a motion to adjourn? Thank you for that.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, do a second. All in favor to adjourn?
Aye.
All right, good evening.